In Palestine, UNRWA describes the food shortage in Gaza as a nutritional crisis and part of a wider humanitarian catastrophe. In Poland, farmers resumed demonstrations against the European Union's policy of importing cheap agricultural products from Ukraine. And in Haiti, several armed criminal groups attacked the National Police Academy in Port-au-Prince amidst the sharp escalation of violence. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, has described the food shortage in Gaza as a nutritional crisis and part of a wider humanitarian catastrophe. UNRWA spokeswoman Tamara Al-Rifai said from Cairo that the situation is so dire and desperation so high that any truck crossing becomes an attraction for the hungry. According to Al-Rifai, 90% of the population in Gaza today faces a high level of acute food insecurity. She said access to northern Gaza has been a real challenge. The UNRWA spokeswoman added that Israeli authorities have rejected more than half of the United Nations requests to bring food, medical supplies, and clean water to the north, and the UNRWA has not been allowed to reach the area since January 23rd. At least 30,717 Palestinians have been killed and 72,156 wounded in Israeli attacks in Gaza since October 7th. But what do the experts say about the famine declaration in Gaza? The resolution of famine existence requires analysis through a technical process, and only government authorities and top UN officials can declare one. Food insecurity experts working on the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, identify a famine in an area on the basis of the existence of three conditions. First, at least 20% of the households must face an extreme lack of food. The second requirement is when at least 30% of children suffer from acute malnutrition. And third, and the last, the conditions are presented when at least 2 adults or 4 children for every 10,000 people die each day from starvation or disease linked to malnutrition. In an updated report of the situation on Gaza presented by the Food and Agriculture Organization at the UN based in the IPC projections, it is stated that the 100% of the population in the area is on IPC phase 3 or above, which means that households either have food consumption gaps reflected by acute malnutrition or are marginally able to meet minimum food needs, but only by depleting essential assets or through crisis coping strategies. Main findings in the report as of 7 February are the entire population in Gaza faces high levels of acute food insecurity inside of a situation of crisis or worse. At the same time, over 50% are in emergency phase, and at least 1 in 4, which would be 500,000 people, faces catastrophic conditions, experiencing extreme lack of food, starvation, and exhaustion of coping capacities. We go to Palestine now, where our correspondent in Gaza, Huda Hegazi, gives us details on a day where the Israeli occupation army denied entry of trucks with humanitarian aid to northern Gaza.
After the massacre carried out by the Army of Israel last week in Gaza City, specifically in Al-Rashid Street, at the time that Gazans were waiting for humanitarian aid to enter the northern area of Gaza City, and were meeting on the streets near the coastal area, and at the time the troops of the Army of Israel proceed to bombard them, taking the life of approximately 120 people. After this massacre, the United Nations World Food Program, which they were responsible for transporting these trucks to the north of Gaza City, they had decided to stop their actions and their work of transporting these food and trucks in northern Gaza City for fear that the Israel army would again commit further massacres against the Gazans. But however, after the famine situation and the situation of the humanitarian massacre being experienced by the Gazans in these areas, they have decided today to resume this work and mission of moving these trucks in the northern area of Gaza City. On Wednesday, they had prepared a convoy consisting of 14 humanitarian aid trucks, which include mainly food to go to the north of Gaza. It should be noted that when the convoy was about to pass through the checkpoint in the area which Israel had set to separate the Gaza Strip into two, precisely after waiting for more than 3 hours to verify these trucks only include humanitarian aid, Israel has refused entry of these trucks and has proceeded to return them to the south area, preventing the necessary humanitarian aid from reaching the north area and Gaza City. In this context, the Palestinian Ministry of Health has condemned this act that has been carried out by Israel, just precisely due to on Wednesday a local report assured that 18 Gazans have lost their life in the north and Gaza City for lack of food, malnutrition, dehydration, and in the meantime also was confirmed that some of them were children and elderly people with chronic disease, and it has denounced that Israel continues to prevent the entry of these foods into those areas of the Gaza Strip. In this sense, Palestinian Ministry of Health warned that the number of martyrs, the number of victims of lacks of food from famine could increase in the coming days, even in the next hours.
West of the city of Rafah, a group of Palestinian youth and volunteers staged an event to mark the 150th day of the genocide in the Gaza Strip. The event was attended by several children and women who raised banners calling for an end to the conflict in the Palestinian enclave. The Israeli bombardment of Gaza has displaced 85% of the population in the midst of a severe shortage of food, drinking water, and medicine, causing the death of more than 30,000 people and around 70,000 wounded.
I came as a volunteer to tell the world not to stop talking about Gaza and not to stop sending aid. I want to tell you how our lives have been turned upside down. We used to live a somehow dignified life. Now we live in camps and fight for a piece of bread and drinking water. This is something we have never experienced before. We are not dreaming. This is a real nightmare.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Poland, farmers hold a new day of protest against the European Union's policy of importing cheap agricultural products from Ukraine. Agricultural workers caravan with their tractors through the streets of the capital city of Warsaw as part of the mobilization. Another group of farmers gathered near the office of the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. A physical confrontation between farmers and the police took place in front of the office when several protesters tried to break through the protective fences and entered the building. These rallies were repressed by the police, who fired tear gas at the demonstrators. Farmers demand measures to cope with the rising cost due to the influx of Ukrainian grain and the impact of environmental regulations. In Russia, at least 18 people were injured and 3 are missing after a fire at the Shanogar thermoelectric plant in southern Siberia. Once at the accident site, the governor of the Republic of Tuva, Vladislav Jovalig, declared the fire under control and revised the casualty figure upward. Jovalig informed that a total of 18 people were hospitalized, among them 6 seriously and 9 of medium consideration. He also pointed out that 3 people out of a total of 21 who were on duty are currently missing. The regional government specified that there was no damage to the 4 boilers of the thermoelectric power plant and they are still operational. However, they had to turn off the central heating in the city for a moment. China surpassed 8.4 billion cross-regional travelers during the Lunar New Year holidays, the largest annual migration in the world. The Transportation Ministry reported that the country's railroad lines made approximately 480 million trips, while the highways reached 7.83 billion trips. Chinese authorities highlighted the improvement in organization, transportation, and security amid the first massive celebrations since China lifted restrictions used during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Lunar New Year 2024 holidays, known as Shunjun, ended on March 5th and lasted for 40 days. On Wednesday, the Special Summit of Australia and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations concluded in Melbourne. Participants called for stability in the South China Sea. A statement issued by the summit called on all countries of the world to avoid any unilateral action that endangers the peace, security and stability of the region. For his part, the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese declared that any activity in the South China Sea should ease any kind of tension. In another context, the summit took the opportunity to condemn Israel's actions against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and called for a permanent ceasefire. Former U.S. President Donald Trump and incumbent Joe Biden are advancing their candidacies for the White House after Super Tuesday, when more than 15 states participated in the primaries to define the Democratic and Republican candidacies. Both Trump and Biden won important delegates in states such as California, Virginia, North Carolina, and Iowa. On the Republican side, Trump prevails with around 1,051 delegates compared to 86 for Nikki Haley, his closest contender, while President Joe Biden accumulates 1,568 delegates after winning in all the Democratic races except for the territory of Samoa. Both politicians are advancing in their nominations despite the judicial measures against Trump for his participation in the assault on the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and the popular rejection of Biden administration support to the Israeli genocide against Palestine. Former U.S. National Ambassador Nikki Haley will do on Wednesday what was anticipated, suspending her Republican presidential campaign, clearing the way for former U.S. President Donald Trump to win the party's nomination this year. Although by Trump's results in primaries and polls, Haley never represented a danger, she put up a fight. But Super Tuesday was the final straw. The ex-governor of South Carolina barely managed a victory in Vermont during the decisive day of the electoral calendar, while the ex-president yesterday pocketed at least 14 states that held primaries, among them California and Texas, the ones that contribute the most delegates. On Wednesday, Nikki Haley is expected to deliver a speech in her state in the city of Charleston. According to local media publications, she will not endorse the candidacy of her former boss. In Peru, Alberto Otarola, president of the Ministers' Council, tendered his resignation after a preliminary investigation was opened accusing him of corruption and wrongful hiring. The resignation of the Peruvian diplomat takes place after the release of a voice recording from a phone call held by Otarola that allegedly featured him using his influence to help his love interest get government contracts. The 25-year-old woman also was hired by the Defense Ministry. Announcing his resignation, Otarola told reporters in Lima he had been framed by political opponents. He claimed that his rivals had manipulated and edited the recordings. However, he said on X that he was resigning to give peace of mind to the president and recompose the cabinet. We have a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Haiti's multi-dimensional crisis worsened by the hour as paramilitary groups control over 80% of the capital and prevent Prime Minister Ariel Henry, currently in Puerto Rico, from returning to the country. The Prime Minister's hopes to return dwindled as flights to Haiti are currently banned. In late February, Henry left the nation to travel to Guyana for a CARICOM summit, where he announced general elections for August 2025. From there, the Prime Minister traveled to Kenya, where he signed with President William Ruto an agreement to send 1,000 police to Haiti. However, since last Thursday, the crisis has worsened with the report of several shootings in Port-au-Prince and the release of thousands of inmates. The violence has caused the displacement of more than 15,000 people. On Sunday, government authorities declared a curfew and a state of emergency. The head of armed criminal groups in Haiti, Jimmy Cherizier, known as Barbecue, threatened a bloody civil war if the Prime Minister does not resign.
We will fight Ariel until the last drop of blood. We will fight Ariel Henry until he resigns. I am ready to make an alliance with the devil, ready to sleep in the same bed as the devil.
On the other hand, the commander of the Haitian National Police, Frank Elbe, highlighted the commitment and courage of the officers to defend the civilian population.
Saludo la valentía de nuestros valientes policías.
I salute the courage of our brave policemen and women who continue to risk their lives to protect the population and prevent the country from collapsing. We are fulfilling our constitutional duty to protect and serve society to prevent its collapse. The police have so far been the main victim of the increase in crime in Haiti.
In this context, uncertainty is growing among citizens who do not feel secure and do not believe that the situation is going to get better.
Now it's the gangs that controls the country. They can become president because this situation is not good at all.
The United Nations Security Council is holding an emergency meeting Wednesday on the situation in Haiti, ravaged by gang violence that threatens civil war unless Prime Minister Ariel Henry resigns. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres this week called for urgent action, in particular by providing financial assistance to the multinational security support mission. United Nations representative in Haiti, Maria Isabel Salvador, will brief the Security Council on developments remotely at its closed-door meeting scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. Armed gangs which control large parts of Haiti announced last week a joint effort to overthrow Henry, and since then the airport, prisons, police stations and other strategic targets in the capital Port-au-Prince have come under attack.
I've been working in and on around Haiti for 30 years now, and I've never, ever seen it this bad. It's absolutely catastrophic. It being the human rights situation, the humanitarian situation, the lack of any kind of political anything, discussions, negotiations.
Haitians face water shortages amid escalating violence with paramilitary groups in the capital. Metropolitan Port-au-Prince is facing a shortage of drinking water. The crisis persists again, where several families in the neighborhood will fill their containers despite the sharp increase in the prices of this vital liquid. In less than 3 days, the price of water has risen 25% due to the closing of several water distribution stations in the city. As with water, some basic necessities have experienced an excessive increase in price since mid-February. In the meantime, Dominican Republic Civil Aviation Board issued a resolution in which immediately suspends the operations of passengers and cargo flights to and from Haiti. In this sense, the Dominican government is based on Article 9 of the International Convention, which allows the state to reserve air traffic in circumstances that compromise safety. Commercial flights from the Dominican Republic have been suspended since last Friday due to the increase of criminal groups' violence in Haiti. In the context of ongoing violence in Port-au-Prince, Kenyan President William Ruto told U.S. officials that his troops could be ready to leave within 72 hours to support Haiti. This statement follows the signing of a bilateral agreement between Kenya and Haiti. The White House, while counting on Kenya's commitment, rules out any deployment of U.S. forces, pledging to accelerate the multinational support mission. However, despite the urgency of the situation, financial obstacles stand in the way of Kenyan troop deployment. President Ruto stressed that without adequate funding, his troops would not be able to leave the country. We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.